3:47 in the morning. Officer Michael Torres had been on the force for 11 years. He'd seen domestic violence calls, overdoses, break-ins that ended badly. But when dispatch sent him to 1847 Ashwood Lane, he had no frame of reference for what was waiting in that attic. The house had been empty for 8 months. At least, that's what every record showed. The last tenant moved out in January, citing personal reasons that she refused to elaborate on. The landlord couldn't rent it after that. Said people would tour the place, seem interested, then call an hour later to back out. No explanation, just changed their minds. The 911 call came from Mrs. Helena Vasquez, 72 years old, lived next door for 30 years. She told the dispatcher she heard a baby crying. Not from the street. Not from another neighbor's home. From inside 1847. From the attic of a house that hadn't had electricity in 8 months. From a house she watched every single day, where no one ever entered, no one ever left. Officer Torres arrived with his partner, Jenny Caldwell. Bodycam footage shows them approaching the front door. It's unlocked. Not broken, not forced. Just open. Like someone knew they were coming. Torres calls out. Standard procedure. No answer. But as they stand in that doorway, you can hear it on the recording. Faint. Coming from above. The sound of something moving. Something breathing. They find the attic access in the hallway ceiling. The door is open. Just a crack. Fresh scratches around the frame. Torres goes up first. His flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, and for a moment, everything in the footage goes quiet. Completely quiet. Then he says 4 words that would end up in every news report for the next month. Oh my God, she's real. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later, Ashley Morrison and Derek Price. They'd worked together for 3 years, handled hundreds of emergency births. This one was different from the moment they climbed those attic stairs. The space was small, maybe 10 feet by 12. No windows, no light source. But there were signs of habitation everywhere. Bottles of water arranged in precise rows against the wall. Crackers, granola bars, all organized by date. A bucket in the corner, and against the far wall, under a wool blanket that looked like it came from the 1940s, a young woman holding a newborn baby. She was conscious, eyes open, but she wasn't looking at the officers or the paramedics. She was staring straight up at the wooden beams above her head, lips moving like she was counting something only she could see. The baby, a girl, was quiet, not sleeping, just quiet, wrapped in fabric that none of them recognized, dark green, woven with a pattern that seemed to shift when the flashlight hit it at different angles. Morrison checked the baby first. That's protocol. Make sure the child is breathing stable. She was. Perfectly healthy, in fact. Temperature normal. Color good. Umbilical. Cord cut clean. Tied off with professional precision. Morrison would later tell investigators she'd never seen better cord care outside of a hospital delivery room. But there were no medical tools in that attic. No scissors. No clamps. Nothing sharp at all. The woman, they didn't know her name yet, wouldn't speak, wouldn't answer questions, just kept staring at those beams, counting on her fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over and over, like a ritual she couldn't stop. While the paramedics prepared to move the woman and baby to the ambulance, Officer Caldwell started documenting the scene. Standard procedure for any unusual circumstance. What she found made this case anything but standard. The tally marks came first, scratched into every wooden beam in that attic. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, grouped in fives, the way prisoners mark days on cell walls. But these weren't random. Caldwell noticed the pattern immediately. They started near the access door, light and shallow. As you moved deeper into the attic, toward where the woman had been lying, they got darker, deeper, more desperate. The final marks, directly above where she'd given birth, were gouged so deep into the wood that splinters had fallen onto the blanket below. Then there were the arrangements. Everything in that attic was placed with deliberate care. The water bottles formed a perfect grid. The food was stacked by date, earliest consumption on top. Even the woman's few pieces of clothing were folded and placed at exact right angles. This wasn't the chaos of someone hiding or being held captive. This was the precision of someone following a very specific plan. But the detail that made Caldwell stop, made her lower her camera and just stare, was the circle, drawn on the floor in white chalk around the spot where the woman had been lying. Not a perfect circle. Something about the proportions was off, elongated on one side. Inside the circle were symbols, not letters, not numbers, geometric shapes that connected to each other in ways that hurt to look at too long. And in the center, where the baby must have been born, the chalk was disturbed, smudged, like something had been erased in a hurry. Officer Torres asked the woman a simple question. "How long have you been up here?" She stopped counting. Her eyes moved from the ceiling to his face, and she answered with one sentence that would become the foundation of everything that followed. 273 days. I had to keep her safe from the watching. St. Catherine's Hospital received them at 4:32 a.m. The maternity ward had been called ahead, prepared for a mother and newborn requiring immediate evaluation. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo was the attending physician. 20 years of obstetric experience. She'd delivered over 3,000 babies, handled complicated home births, emergency C-sections, every scenario medical school and real life could throw at her. She examined the baby first. Vitals perfect, weight appropriate for full term. No signs of distress or complications. The umbilical cord had been cut approximately 4 hours prior, based on tissue examination. The cut was clean, surgical level clean. But when Dr. Okonkwo asked about sterile equipment, the paramedics told her there was none. No scissors, no blades, nothing in that attic that could have made a cut that precise. The mother's examination raised more questions. Physically, she was stable, dehydrated, underweight, but her blood pressure was normal. No signs of hemorrhage, no infection. For someone who'd just given birth alone in an attic with no medical assistance, she was in remarkably good condition. Too good, Dr. Okonkwo would later note in her report. But it was the psychiatric evaluation that changed everything. Dr. Marcus Webb, the hospital's night psychiatrist, sat with the woman for 40 minutes. She answered some questions, gave her name, Sarah Chen, 23 years old. Confirmed she'd been living in that attic voluntarily. Said she'd given birth alone, with no assistance. But when Dr. Webb asked about the baby's father, about her pregnancy, about why she chose that specific location, she shut down completely, stopped talking, started counting again on her fingers. The only thing she said, repeated over and over like a prayer, was this: "The calculations were correct. I gave birth during the gap. 3 hours and 17 minutes when they couldn't hear us. But the window is closing. It's always closing. Detective Lisa Rodriguez caught the case at 6 a.m. Missing person turned mysterious birth. No clear crime, but circumstances that demanded investigation. She started with the evidence collected from the attic. The fabric wrapped around the baby went to the forensics lab first. Material analysis showed plant fibers, tightly woven, professionally made. But the botanist on staff, Dr. James Chen, couldn't identify the plant source. He sent samples to 3 colleagues at different universities. All came back with the same answer. The cellular structure matched no known living species. The closest comparison was to fibers found in archaeological sites, plants that hadn't existed for at least 200 years. The chalk used for the floor symbols was basic calcium carbonate, available at any art supply store. But the symbols themselves were another matter. Rodriguez photographed them, sent the images to a professor of linguistics at the State University. Dr. Amanda Foster studied the images for 2 days before responding. Her email was brief. These aren't any language in my database. The geometric progression suggests mathematical notation, but not from any system I recognize. Where did you find these? The tally marks numbered exactly 273. The same number Sarah Chen had given for days in the attic. But there were other marks too, found during more careful examination. Tiny scratches near each tally group. Numbers, dates, all corresponding to astronomical events, new moons, planetary alignments, meteor showers. Someone had been tracking the sky from inside a windowless attic with no internet, no phone, no connection to the outside world. And every single calculation, Detective Rodriguez confirmed with an astronomer, was accurate. But the evidence that would break this case wide open wasn't in the attic. It wasn't in the forensics lab. It was in the hospital nursery, where nurses were beginning to notice something impossible about Sarah Chen's baby. Something that made them check and recheck their observations. Something that made the night shift supervisor call Dr. Okonkwo back to the hospital at 3 a.m., 3 days after the birth, her voice shaking as she said, "You need to see this. The baby. She's listening to something." Nurse Patricia Williams had worked in neonatal care for 16 years. She'd seen premature twins fighting for life, babies born with heart defects, children who needed machines to breathe. She knew the rhythms of newborn behavior, the crying patterns, the sleep cycles, the way infants respond to stimulus. What she observed in baby Chen, they couldn't use a first name because Sarah refused to provide one, violated every pattern she'd learned. The first night, Williams noted it in her chart. Baby unusually quiet, responsive to touch, but doesn't cry for feeding. She mentioned it to the day shift. They observed the same behavior. The baby would turn her head when spoken to, track movement with her eyes, show all signs of normal neurological function. But she never cried. Not during blood draws, not during diaper changes, not during the standard heel stick test that makes every newborn scream. Dr. Okonkwo ran every test available. Hearing assessment came back normal. Pain response reflexes tested within standard range. The baby could feel everything. She just wasn't responding the way babies respond. On the third day, Williams was doing her midnight rounds. The nursery was quiet, except for the usual sounds. Machines beeping, other babies fussing, the hum of fluorescent lights. She approached baby Chen's bassinet and froze. The baby's eyes were open, wide open, staring at the ceiling with an intensity that didn't belong on a 3-day-old face. And her head was tilted, not like a newborn's random movement, tilted at a specific angle, like she was tracking something moving across the ceiling. Williams looked up. Nothing there, just acoustic tiles and sprinkler heads. But the baby's eyes kept moving, following something from left to right, right to left. Precise, deliberate, like she was watching something real. Williams grabbed Dr. Okonkwo from the on-call room. Together they watched for 20 minutes. The baby never broke focus, never blinked. Just tracked this invisible something with mechanical precision. Dr. Okonkwo brought in her penlight, shined it in the baby's eyes to test pupil response. The pupils contracted, appropriately, but the baby's gaze didn't follow the light. She kept watching the ceiling, completely absorbed in whatever she perceived there. Then, at exactly 3:47 a.m., the same time Sarah had given birth 4 days earlier, the baby stopped. Her eyes closed. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since being born, she made a sound. Not a cry, a hum, low frequency, almost subsonic. The sound lasted exactly 17 seconds, then silence. The baby fell asleep like nothing had happened. Dr. Okonkwo recorded the time, filed a report, and called in a pediatric neurologist for morning consultation. But before she left the nursery, she noticed something that made her pull out her phone and photograph the baby's arm. The birthmarks everyone had noted in the initial examination. Small brown marks scattered across the infant's left forearm. Under the fluorescent light at this angle, Okonkwo could see what they'd missed before. The marks weren't random. They formed a pattern, a geometric progression that matched exactly the symbols Sarah had drawn on the attic floor. Detective Rodriguez began building Sarah Chen's background while the medical team studied her baby. Missing person report filed 9 months prior by Sarah's roommate, Jennifer Park. Park was a graduate student in biomedical engineering. She and Sarah shared an apartment near the university where Sarah was in her 3rd year of medical school. According to Park's statement, Sarah was a model student, top 15% of her class. Quiet, focused, no history of mental health issues, no drug use, no concerning relationships. But Park's statement included one detail that Rodriguez marked for follow-up. 6 weeks before Sarah disappeared, her behavior changed. She became obsessed with patterns, would spend hours mapping out data on graph paper. Numbers, dates, coordinates. Park asked her once what she was working on. Sarah said it was research for a class project on predictive algorithms in emergency medicine. Park believed her. Sarah was always working on something academic. Rodriguez obtained a warrant for Sarah's laptop. The digital forensics team spent 2 days extracting her search history and files. What they found wasn't medical research. Starting 4 months before her disappearance, Sarah's searches followed a specific progression. First, historical birth rituals across different cultures. Then, astronomical events and their correlation to historical records. Then, acoustic properties of enclosed spaces. Then, methods of soundproofing. Then, properties located at specific coordinates she'd been calculating. One search stood out, entered 3 months before she vanished. How to prevent detection by frequency tracking. The search led to forums about electronic surveillance, but Sarah hadn't stopped there. She'd found academic papers on bioacoustic monitoring, animal tracking through sound signature, military applications of acoustic detection, and buried in her bookmarks, a research paper from 1987 titled Anomalous Low-Frequency Emissions in Pre-Industrial Structures. The paper documented unexplained sounds in old buildings, sounds that seemed to respond to human presence. Rodriguez found Sarah's research notes in a folder labeled Convergence Project. Hundreds of pages, calculations mapping lunar cycles, planetary positions, even solar wind data. Everything pointed toward a specific date and time. March 17th, 3:47 a.m., the exact moment Sarah would give birth 9 months later. But these notes were created before Sarah was pregnant, before she had any reason to care about birth timing. Jennifer Park agreed to another interview. Rodriguez asked her if Sarah ever mentioned the address, 1847 Ashwood Lane. Park's face went pale. Yes. Sarah had visited that house multiple times. She said she was looking at rental properties, wanted to move somewhere quieter to focus on her studies. But Park remembered something else. Sarah came back from one visit and seemed different, shaken. Park asked what was wrong. Sarah said, "The house keeps time. I can hear it counting." Park thought she was joking, asked what she meant. Sarah wouldn't explain, just said, "If you listen long enough, you realize it's not the house. It's what lives in the space between the walls." Detective Rodriguez pulled every record associated with 1847 Ashwood Lane. The house was built in 1924 by a carpenter named Thomas Brennan. Standard 2-story Victorian. Nothing remarkable about the construction, according to the original permits. Brennan lived there until 1931, when he sold it and moved out of state. The property records showed a normal progression of owners until 1985. That year, a woman named Margaret Hollis rented the house. Single, 25 years old, worked as a laboratory technician at the university hospital. She lived there for 4 months. Then she terminated her lease early and moved across the country to Oregon. The landlord at the time noted in his records that Hollis seemed frightened. She wouldn't specify why, just said she couldn't stay in the house anymore. Rodriguez tracked down Margaret Hollis, now 64 years old, living in Portland. The phone call lasted 40 minutes. Hollis hadn't spoken about that house in 39 years. But when Rodriguez mentioned the attic, Hollis's voice changed. She said, "Someone finally listened to it. Someone finally understood." Hollis's story matched Sarah's in ways that couldn't be coincidence. She'd been drawn to the house. Couldn't explain why, just felt pulled there. After moving in, she heard sounds, not footsteps or wind, a rhythmic pattern coming from the walls, tapping. She thought it was pipes at first, but the pattern was too regular, too deliberate. It happened every night between 3 and 4 a.m., and over weeks, she realized the pattern was changing, becoming more complex, like it was trying to communicate. Then Hollis discovered she was pregnant, unplanned. She couldn't remember the conception. That frightened her more than anything. She had a medical background, understood her own cycle. There was no window when this should have happened. But the pregnancy test was positive, and the night she found out, the tapping in the walls became frantic, faster, more insistent, like whatever was making the sound knew. Hollis terminated the pregnancy. She wouldn't provide more details than that. But she said the morning after the procedure, she went up to the attic. She'd never been up there before. The access had been painted shut, but that morning it was open, and scratched into the wooden beams were tally marks, fresh marks, like something had been counting down and started over. Rodriguez asked the question that would define the entire investigation. "Did you make those marks?" Hollis's answer was immediate. "No, I never went back up there. I moved out that day. But I've thought about those marks for 39 years. Because I know, I absolutely know, I was the only person living in that house. And nothing human made those marks in the hours between my procedure and when I saw them. Nothing human could have known what I'd done." Rodriguez contacted the property management company that currently owned 1847 Ashwood Lane. Requested tenant records for the past 40 years. 3 other women had lived there, all single, all in their 20s, all moved out suddenly, without explanation. Rodriguez was able to track down 2 of them. Same story, same sounds in the walls, same feeling of being watched, being counted. One of them, Rachel Morrison, age 41, mentioned she'd had a miscarriage while living there. 3 weeks later, she heard something in the walls that sounded like crying. She moved out the next day, but there was one detail in the property records that Rodriguez almost missed. A structural inspection from 2003. The inspector noted anomalous spaces in the walls, gaps that didn't match the architectural plans. He recommended opening the walls to check for damage. The work was never completed. The contractor abandoned the job after 2 days. His report stated, "Unable to continue due to acoustic interference. Recommend full acoustic survey before proceeding." No survey was ever done. Dr. James Chen called Detective Rodriguez on day 7 of the investigation. The fabric wrapped around baby Chen had been sent to 4 different laboratories. All returned the same impossible conclusion. The plant fibers were from a species called Gossypium darwinii, a cotton variety that grew in the Galapagos Islands, past tense. Because Gossypium darwinii went extinct in the 1960s due to invasive species and habitat destruction. But the impossibility went deeper. Carbon dating placed the fabric's creation at approximately 1890, plus or minus 20 years. The weaving pattern matched techniques used in late 19th century textile production, but the fabric showed no signs of age, no deterioration, no brittleness. It was as preserved as something made yesterday. One of the labs ran chemical analysis looking for preservatives or treatments that might explain this. They found nothing. The fabric simply shouldn't exist in this condition. Rodriguez returned to the attic with a forensic team. She wanted to know where Sarah had obtained this fabric. A thorough search revealed no hidden storage spaces, no boxes or containers. Just the supplies Sarah had brought in: food, water, basic necessities, and the fabric, folded carefully in the corner where Sarah had been lying. Enough material to wrap the baby 3 times over. The forensic team noticed something else during this second search: impressions in the dust on the attic floor. Sarah's footprints were there, moving from the access door to her makeshift bed. But there were other impressions, not footprints, circular marks, perfect circles about 6 inches in diameter, pressed into the dust. 12 of them, arranged in a pattern that formed a larger circle around where Sarah had given birth. The forensic photographer documented them. When Rodriguez looked at the photos later, she noticed the circles were all exactly the same depth, the same pressure, like they'd been placed by something mechanical, or something that knew precisely how much weight to apply. One of the forensic technicians, David Mora, mentioned offhand that the circles reminded him of something. He'd worked a case 3 years prior, home invasion. Except the homeowner insisted nothing was taken and no one had broken in. But there were circular marks in the dust on their bedroom floor. Same size, same spacing. The homeowner claimed they woke up at 3:47 a.m., feeling like they were being watched. By the time they turned on the lights, the feeling was gone. But the marks were there in the morning. Rodriguez asked Mora for the address of that case. He pulled it from his files. 1847 Ashwood Lane, second floor bedroom, directly below the attic. The homeowner was a woman named Jessica Torres. She'd moved out 2 weeks after the incident. Never filed charges. Just wanted to be gone. Mora had closed the case as unfounded. Nothing to investigate. Rodriguez made a note to find Jessica Torres, but first, she needed to return to the hospital, because Dr. Okonkwo had called. There was something new with the baby, something that had the entire pediatric staff refusing to enter the nursery alone. The video footage would eventually leak to news outlets. 40 seconds of security camera recording from the hospital nursery. Baby Chen lying in her bassinet at 3:47 a.m., exactly 1 week after her birth. The lights in the nursery flicker, just once, and in that flicker, every baby in the room starts crying. Every baby except one. Baby Chen opens her eyes, tilts her head at that same precise angle, and 12 perfect circles appear in the condensation on the glass window behind her. They fade in 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, everyone watching the footage felt the same thing. The absolute certainty that something was in that room. Something that knew it was being recorded. Something that wanted them to know it was watching back. Rodriguez spent 3 days in the county archives. The building smelled like old paper and floor wax. Row after row of property records, birth certificates, death records. Everything filed by hand before computers. Everything preserved in manila folders that cracked when you opened them. She started with 1847 Ashwood Lane, went back to the beginning. Thomas Brennan purchased the land in 1923, built the house himself over 14 months. The permits showed standard construction, foundation, framing, roof. But there was an amendment filed in month 9, request to add additional support structures to the second floor ceiling. The stated reason, structural reinforcement for planned attic conversion. Approved without issue. Construction completed April 1924. Brennan moved in with his wife, Catherine, in May of that year. They had no children. Census records showed just the two of them through 1925, 1926, 1927. Then in 1928, a birth certificate. Rebecca Brennan, born March 17th at 3:47 a.m. Home birth. No hospital record, no attending physician listed. Just Thomas and Catherine Brennan as witnesses. Rodriguez stopped, read the date again. March 17th, 3:47 a.m. The exact date and time Sarah Chen had given birth. 61 years earlier. She pulled Rebecca Brennan's records. The girl lived in the house until age 3. Then the family moved to Wisconsin. No explanation in the property records. Just a quick sale to a family named Morrison. The Morrisons lived there for 8 years. No incidents noted. But Rebecca Brennan's life had documentation. School records from Wisconsin. Marriage certificate at age 22. Death certificate at age 34. Cause of death, suicide. The coroner's report was brief. Rebecca Brennan drove her car off a bridge in November 1962. She left a note. Rodriguez obtained a copy from Wisconsin State Archives. Most of it was apologies to her husband and 2 children. But the final paragraph stood out. I can still hear it counting. After all these years, after all this distance, I hear it in the walls of every house I've lived in. It counted me into the world, and now it's counting me out. I was born during the gap, but the gap doesn't last forever. It's closing. I can feel it closing. Forgive me." Rodriguez cross-referenced the date of Rebecca's death, November 3rd, 1962. She checked astronomical records, lunar eclipse, total eclipse, the moon completely dark for 3 hours and 17 minutes, the same duration Sarah Chen had mentioned. 3 hours and 17 minutes when they couldn't hear us. The Morrison family who bought the house in 1931 had 3 children, all born before they moved in. Rodriguez tracked down the youngest, Edward Morrison, now 91 years old, living in a nursing home 2 states away. She made the drive. Edward's memory was sharp. Too sharp, he told her. He wished he could forget. Edward was 7 when his family moved into 1847 Ashwood Lane. He remembered the attic. His father had converted it to a storage space. Edward would play up there sometimes, hide and seek with his siblings. But there were rules. Never go up after dark. Never stay up there alone. Never touch the beams where someone had scratched marks into the wood. Edward asked his father once why those rules existed. His father said the previous owner warned him about the attic, said strange things happened up there, sounds at night, feelings of being observed. The father didn't believe in ghost stories, but he respected the previous owner's concern. So the rules stayed. When Edward was 12, his older sister Margaret got pregnant, unmarried, 19 years old. It was 1944. The shame was enormous. Margaret wanted to keep the baby. Their parents forbade it. They sent her to a home for unwed mothers in another state. But before Margaret left, Edward heard her talking to their mother. Margaret said she'd been having dreams about the attic, about giving birth up there where no one could find her, where it would be safe. Their mother called it pregnancy hysteria, made Margaret leave the next day. Margaret gave birth in the home for unwed mothers. The baby was adopted. Margaret came back different, hollow. She lived in the house for another year, then moved to California. Edward never saw her again. She died in 1989, but Edward remembered something that happened the night Margaret moved out. He woke at 3:47 a.m. to sounds coming from the attic, footsteps, pacing back and forth. He went to his parents' room, woke his father. They went up together. The attic was empty, but there were new marks on the beams, fresh scratches forming a date. March 17th, 1945. Edward's father painted over the marks the next day, put a padlock on the attic access. The family moved out 6 months later. Edward's father never explained why, just said it was time to leave. While Rodriguez investigated the house's ownership history, the city made a decision. 1847 Ashwood Lane was structurally unsound. Too many questions, too much attention. Easier to demolish it and sell the lot. Demo was scheduled for 2 weeks after Sarah's discovery. But before the demolition crew could begin, the city required a standard archaeological survey. Any property over 75 years old needed clearance to ensure no historical artifacts would be lost. The survey team was headed by Dr. Linda Watts, a professor of historical archaeology from the State University. Routine job. She'd done hundreds. Ground-penetrating radar scan, visual inspection, soil samples. Usually took a day. She started on a Tuesday morning. The demo crew was scheduled for Thursday. Thursday came and went. Dr. Watts requested a delay. The radar had found something. Anomalies beneath the foundation. unusual density readings that suggested structures below ground level. The city granted her 3 more days. Watts brought in a full excavation team. They started digging on Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, they had uncovered the first chamber. Not a basement. The original house plans showed no basement. This was something else. A space carved directly into the earth beneath the foundation. Roughly 8 feet by 10 feet. Reinforced walls. A ceiling that connected to support beams running under the house's first floor. Inside the chamber, they found markers. Not recent. The wood had carbonized. Carbon dating placed them at 1897, plus or minus 15 years. 27 years before Thomas Brennan built the house. Someone had dug this chamber, reinforced it, and buried it decades before the house existed. The question was why. The chamber had markings on the walls, carved directly into the packed earth. Symbols. Dr. Watts photographed everything. The symbols matched the ones Sarah Chen had drawn on the attic floor, matched the geometric progression of the birthmarks on baby Chen's arm. But these symbols were over 100 years old. Dr. Watts found something else in the chamber. Fabric, preserved in the dry earth. The same impossible fabric wrapped around the baby. Same weave-in pattern. Same extinct cotton species. But this fabric was buried before 1900. Before the house, before Thomas Brennan. Before any recorded connection to births or attics or women hearing sounds in walls. The excavation continued. By Wednesday, they'd found 3 more chambers, all identical, all arranged in a geometric pattern beneath where the house's foundation would eventually be built. And in each chamber, more fabric, more symbols, more evidence that someone, over a century ago, had prepared this site for something specific. Detective Rodriguez arrived at the excavation on Thursday. Dr. Watts showed her everything, the chambers, the symbols, the fabric. Rodriguez asked the obvious question, who built these? Watts had been researching that for days. Property records showed the land was vacant before Brennan purchased it. Before that, it was part of a larger tract owned by a township trust. Before that, open land, no structures, no registered occupants. But Watts found something in the Historical Society archives, a surveyor's map from 1892. The land was marked with a notation, a void for development, ground instability reported. The surveyor who made that notation was named Richard Wells. Watts found his journal in a private collection donated to the university in the 1970s. Wells wrote about that survey. He'd been hired to assess the land for potential sale. When he walked the property, he heard sounds coming from underground, rhythmic tapping. He thought it was water, maybe an underground stream. But when he stopped to listen, the tapping stopped too. Every time, like it knew when someone was paying attention. Wells dug down 3 feet at the spot where the sound was loudest. Found packed earth, disturbed earth. Someone had dug here before. Recently, based on the soil composition, he kept digging. 5 feet down, he hit wood. Reinforced beams. He stopped digging, filled the hole, marked the land as unstable, and refused to survey it again. His journal entry ended with one line. Some ground should remain unbuilt. Some things should stay buried. But Thomas Brennan built there anyway. 29 years after Wells walked away. Did Brennan know about the chambers? About what Wells had found? Rodriguez checked Brennan's background. He wasn't from the area, moved from Pennsylvania specifically to purchase this land and build this house. She found one letter in his archived papers, written to his wife before construction began. The letter mentioned he'd found the perfect location, said the land already knew what was coming, said the ground had been prepared by those who understood. Rodriguez asked Dr. Watts about the timing. The chambers were built around 1897. The house was built in 1924, 27 years between. Then Rebecca Brennan, born in 1928. Margaret Morrison's pregnancy in 1944. The tenant Margaret Hollis in 1985. Rachel Morrison's miscarriage in 2002. Jessica Torres in 2022. Sarah Chen in 2025. Dr. Watts did the math. The intervals weren't random. Rebecca's birth came 4 years after the house completion. Margaret Morrison, 16 years after that. Margaret Hollis, 41 years later. The intervals were increasing. Following a mathematical progression, exponential growth. And if the pattern held, the next convergence after Sarah Chen would be in 3 months. Dr. Amanda Foster, the linguistics professor who'd analyzed Sarah's Attic symbols, requested a meeting with Detective Rodriguez. Foster had been working with a colleague, Dr. David Martinez, a mathematician specializing in pattern recognition. Together, they'd decoded the symbols. They weren't language, they were notation, mathematical instructions for calculating specific moments in time. Moments when multiple astronomical factors aligned. Lunar position, planetary alignment, solar activity. The symbols provided formulas to identify when these convergences occurred. Martinez had run the calculations backwards, starting with Sarah Chen's birth date, March 17, 2025, 3:47 a.m., and working through history. Every convergence matched a documented event at 1847 Ashwood Lane. Rebecca Brennan's birth in 1928, the night Margaret Morrison heard footsteps in the empty attic in 1945. Margaret Hollis discovering her pregnancy in 1985. Every significant event at that house happened during a convergence. But the convergences weren't random. They formed a sequence. Each one created conditions where, according to the mathematics, electromagnetic frequencies operated differently. Normal background radiation reduced. Acoustic properties altered. For the duration of the convergence, always 3 hours and 17 minutes, the physical properties of that location changed. Foster explained what this meant. Sound behaves differently during these windows. Frequencies that normally propagate through air and solid materials get dampened, absorbed. It creates acoustic dead zones. If someone wanted to hide from something that tracked by sound, that detected presence through vibration and frequency, a convergence would provide temporary invisibility. Rodriguez asked the question that had been building since she first read Sarah's attic notes. What was tracking these women? Foster and Martinez had a hypothesis. Not supernatural, not paranormal. Something that existed in a frequency range humans don't naturally perceive. Low-frequency sound waves below 20 Hz, infrasound, known to cause feelings of dread, of being watched, known to pass through walls, through structures. But natural infrasound comes from weather, from geological activity, random sources. The sound at 1847 Ashwood Lane wasn't random. It was patterned, communicative, responding to human presence, like it was aware. Martinez had one more piece of information. He'd calculated every convergence for the next 100 years. The pattern was accelerating. The intervals between convergences getting shorter. After Sarah Chen, 3 months. After that, 6 weeks. Then 2 weeks. Then days. The sequence was building towards something. A point where the convergences would overlap, where the gap between them would close completely. That point occurred in 18 months, March 17, 2027. When that date arrived, the mathematics showed something unprecedented. The convergence wouldn't end after 3 hours and 17 minutes. It would remain permanent, an acoustic dead zone that never closed. Foster asked Rodriguez if she understood what that meant. Rodriguez did. For over a century, something had been counting, waiting, using the convergences to mark time. The women, the pregnancies, the births during gaps, they were all connected to this countdown. And when the countdown ended, when the final convergence arrived, whatever had been waiting would have permanent access. Rodriguez asked what would happen to the children born during convergences. Rebecca Brennan died at 34, hearing counting in every wall. What about baby Chen? What about any child born during these windows? Martinez didn't have an answer, but he had observation. Every child born during a convergence, Rebecca, and likely others they hadn't documented, showed unusual sensory processing. They heard frequencies others couldn't, perceived patterns invisible to normal perception, like they existed partially in the same frequency range as whatever was counting. The excavation team found one more piece of evidence. In the oldest chamber beneath the house foundation, they discovered a metal box, sealed, preserved in the dry earth. Inside the box, a journal, written in 1896 by someone named Elias Marsh. Marsh was a surveyor, possibly working with Richard Wells. His journal described finding this location, said the land had properties he'd never encountered. Sound behaved strangely here. Equipment malfunctioned, compasses spun. And at night, if you listened carefully, you could hear counting coming from below the ground. Marsh wrote that he'd consulted with others, people who studied acoustic phenomena. They told him this location sat on a geological formation that created unusual resonance conditions, a natural amplifier for low-frequency sound. But the counting wasn't natural. It had rhythm, pattern, intelligence. Marsh decided to conduct an experiment. He would dig chambers in the exact spots where the sound was strongest, create resonance spaces that might reveal what was generating the signal. The journal ended abruptly. The final entry, dated March 17, 1897. I went into the deepest chamber tonight, stayed until the convergence began. The counting grew so loud I had to cover my ears, but it wasn't coming from the earth. It was coming from ahead, from the future, like something reaching back through time to mark this moment. I've sealed the chambers. Whatever wants to come through, the convergences are its doorway. God help whoever builds here. Rodriguez closed the journal. March 17, 1897. The first documented convergence, 128 years before Sarah Chen gave birth. The countdown had been running for over a century, and now, with 3 months until the next convergence, she had one priority: find Sarah Chen and her baby before they disappeared into the pattern completely. But Sarah Chen had already moved. Security footage would later show her leaving the hospital on day 9. She walked out through the front entrance at 3:47 p.m., carrying her baby. No one stopped her. No one saw her leave. Every staff member in the lobby that afternoon reported being distracted at that exact moment, a sudden feeling of needing to look away. When they reviewed the footage, Sarah was clearly visible, walking slowly, deliberately, past the information desk, past security, past dozens of people. But no one's eyes tracked her movement. It was as if, for those 40 seconds, everyone in that lobby simultaneously decided to look at anything except the woman walking out with an infant. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible, 12 circular shadows moved across the floor behind her, keeping pace, following her out into the world. Before Sarah Chen walked out of St. Catherine's Hospital, the pediatric team had documented 9 days of observations. Dr. Okonkwo compiled everything into a report that would eventually be sealed by court order. But Detective Rodriguez obtained a copy. What she read kept her awake for 3 consecutive nights. Day 1. Observations were standard. Baby girl, weight 7 pounds 2 ounces, length 20 inches. APGAR scores normal, reflexes appropriate. The only notation that stood out: infant unusually alert for newborn. Tracks movement with advanced focus. Most newborns have limited vision at birth. Their eyes wander, struggle to focus. Baby Chen's eyes locked onto faces, followed movement across the room with precision that typically doesn't develop for weeks. Day 2 brought the first documented anomaly. Nurse Williams noted, infant does not cry for normal triggers: hunger, discomfort, diaper change. However, shows distress response to specific sound frequencies. The pediatric team tested this, played various sounds at different frequencies. The baby remained calm through most of the spectrum. But at 18 Hertz, deep in the infrasound range, below normal human hearing, the baby's heart rate spiked, not gradually, instantly, from 60 beats per minute to 140. The moment they stopped the frequency, her heart rate returned to baseline. Dr. Marcus Webb, the psychiatrist, observed mother and baby together on day 3. Sarah held her daughter, but wouldn't make eye contact with her. Kept her gaze fixed on the wall behind the baby's head. Webb asked why. Sarah said, "If I look directly at her, I can see them watching through her eyes. They're using her to count me." Webb noted this as possible postpartum psychosis, recommended psychiatric hold. But before the paperwork could be processed, Sarah became lucid, answered questions appropriately, showed no other signs of delusion. The hold was cancelled. Day 4. Night shift. This was when Nurse Williams documented the ceiling tracking behavior. But there was more in her notes. She'd stayed in the nursery for 40 minutes, watching the baby watch the ceiling. During that time, Williams felt her phone vibrate. She checked it. No notifications. It vibrated again. Still nothing. Then she realized the vibrations were rhythmic, timed, like Morse code. She counted. Groups of 5 vibrations, then a pause. Groups of 5, pause. The tally mark pattern. She checked her phone logs later. No record of any signals received during that time. But the vibrations had been real. She'd felt them. Day 5 brought the neurological consultation. Dr. Raymond Torres, pediatric neurologist with 23 years of experience. He performed a full assessment. Brain imaging showed normal structure. EEG showed normal electrical activity. But there was an anomaly in the scan data. Background interference, low-frequency noise that shouldn't have been there. The hospital's MRI machines were shielded specifically to prevent outside interference. Yet the scans showed consistent 18 Hz signals present during the entire imaging session. Torres ran the scan 3 times, same interference every time. Only when scanning baby Chen. Torres documented something else. He placed electrodes on the baby's scalp to monitor brain activity. Standard procedure. But the electrodes kept detaching. The adhesive was medical grade, designed to stay attached for hours. These fell off within minutes. Torres tried different placement, different adhesive. Same result. Like something was actively rejecting the monitoring equipment. He finally managed to get a 30-second recording before the electrodes failed completely. That 30-second recording showed normal infant brainwaves, but underneath the expected patterns, Torres found something else. A carrier wave. Consistent, unchanging, operating at exactly 18 Hz. It wasn't being generated by the baby's brain. It was passing through her brain, using her neural tissue as a conductor. Torres sent the recording to 3 colleagues. All confirmed the same thing. The signal was real. The source was unknown. Day 6. Sarah agreed to answer more questions. Dr. Webb recorded the session. He asked about the father. Sarah said there wasn't a father in any conventional sense. She'd become pregnant during a convergence 304 days before giving birth. She was alone in her apartment. Woke at 3:47 a.m. feeling pressure. Not pain, just presence. Like the air around her had become solid. She couldn't move, couldn't call out. The pressure lasted 17 minutes. When it released, she knew she was pregnant. Knew the child growing inside her wasn't entirely human. Webb asked what she meant. Sarah explained. The baby was hers biologically, her genetic material. But there was something else woven into the development, information encoded at a frequency level. The baby's cells were normal, her DNA was normal, but the spaces between her cells, the quantum foam where particles blink in and out of existence, something was using that space, storing itself there, waiting. Webb noted this explanation as evidence of delusion, but he also noted that Sarah's understanding of cellular biology and quantum physics was accurate. She wasn't rambling. She was describing a hypothesis using proper scientific terminology. A hypothesis that was, technically, not impossible, just improbable. Day 7 brought the incident that would define everything else. The security footage Rodriguez had seen. Baby Chen at 3:47 a.m., exactly 1 week after birth. But the footage only showed 40 seconds. The full recording ran for 3 hours and 17 minutes, the length of a convergence. During those 3 hours, baby Chen never moved, never blinked, just stared at the ceiling with absolute focus. The 12 circles appeared in the window condensation within the first minute. But they didn't fade. They remained for the entire duration, and they weren't random. They moved, slowly, deliberately, forming and reforming into different geometric patterns. The same patterns carved into the attic beams, the same patterns in the underground chambers. The pediatric team watched from the hallway. No one would enter the nursery. They couldn't explain why. Just that every time someone approached the door, their feet stopped moving, like walking into an invisible wall. Dr. Okonkwo called hospital security. 3 guards arrived. All 3 described the same sensation. The doorway was open. Nothing physically blocked it. But they couldn't make, themselves, cross the threshold. At 6:47 a.m., the convergence ended. The circles faded from the window. Baby Chen closed her eyes and slept. The invisible barrier vanished. Nurses entered to check on her. Vitals normal, no signs of distress. But every piece of electronic equipment in the nursery had reset. Monitors, computers, even the digital thermometer, all showing default settings, like they'd just been unplugged and restarted. Dr. Okonkwo had photographed the birthmarks on baby Chen's left forearm during the initial examination. Standard practice. Document all identifying features. The marks appeared normal. Café au lait spots, common in newborns. About 20 of them scattered across a 4-inch area. But after the ceiling tracking behavior, Okonkwo looked at the photographs again. Under standard lighting, the marks looked random. Under the fluorescent lights at a specific angle, she'd seen the pattern. She brought the photos to Dr. Amanda Foster, the linguist working with Detective Rodriguez. Asked if the birthmarks matched the symbols from Sarah's attic floor. Foster spent 2 days analyzing the photos, used pattern recognition software, mapped each birthmark's location, size, and shape. The software found correlations, not exact matches, but the birthmarks formed nodes in a geometric progression. Connect them with lines, and you recreated the attic symbols, not approximately. Exactly. The birthmarks were a map, instructions written on the baby's skin. Foster showed the analysis to Dr. Martinez, the mathematician. Martinez recognized the progression immediately. Fibonacci sequence. Each mark's position relative to the others followed the golden ratio. 1.618, the number that appears throughout nature, in seashell spirals, flower petals, galaxy arms, the fundamental pattern of growth and expansion. But Martinez found something else. The birthmarks weren't just following the Fibonacci sequence. They were encoding information within it, using the sequence as a framework to embed data. He spent 3 days extracting that data, converting positions to numbers, numbers to coordinates, coordinates to locations. The birthmarks encoded 7 locations, GPS coordinates accurate to within 1 meter. Martinez mapped them. All 7 locations were in the United States, spread across 5 states. No obvious connection between them. He gave the coordinates to Detective Rodriguez. Rodriguez ran each location through property databases. All 7 were residential addresses, houses, built between 1897 and 1931, all vacant currently, all with histories similar to 1847 Ashwood Lane, sudden tenant departures, reports of unusual sounds, unexplained feelings of being watched. She cross-referenced the construction dates with astronomical records. Every house was built in the year following a convergence. Same pattern. Someone identifies the location during a convergence, builds a structure on that exact spot. Then the structure becomes part of the network, part of the counting system. Rodriguez sent teams to investigate all 7 locations. 5 of the houses had attics. All 5 had tally marks carved into the wooden beams. The marks varied in number, different counts, but all following the same pattern. Groups of 5. Precise, deliberate. And in 3 of the attics, investigators found fabric. The same extinct cotton, the same impossible preservation. 2 of the houses had no attic access, but ground-penetrating radar showed chambers beneath the foundations, identical to the chambers under 1847 Ashwood Lane. The excavation teams found the same symbols carved into the earth, the same fabric sealed in metal boxes, the same evidence of preparation decades before the houses existed. Martinez calculated convergence dates for all 7 locations. Each house sat on a spot where convergences occurred. But the timing was different. The convergences didn't happen simultaneously. They formed a sequence, starting at one location, moving to the next, creating a wave pattern across the country. The wave took 18 months to complete one full cycle, from the first convergence to the last, then starting over. Rodriguez mapped the sequence, drew lines connecting the locations in order. The pattern formed a shape, not random, geometric. The same geometric progression encoded in baby Chen's birthmarks. The houses weren't isolated incidents. They were nodes in a network. And the network was growing. Martinez found building permits for 3 more structures, all filed in the past 6 months, all at locations where convergences would occur in the next year. Someone was expanding the network, adding new nodes, preparing for something. Rodriguez obtained the permits. All 3 were filed by different contractors, different owners, no obvious connection between them. But each permit included structural amendments, requests for reinforced attic spaces, specific measurements. The measurements matched exactly, 8 feet by 12 feet. The same dimensions as Sarah Chen's attic, the same dimensions as every attic in the network. One permit was for a property in Montana. Construction started 3 weeks ago. Rodriguez sent a team. They arrived to find the house half built, the attic framing completed, and carved into the fresh lumber already present were tally marks. The construction foreman swore his crew hadn't made them. Said he checked the lumber that morning. Clean. Came back from lunch and the marks were there. Fresh cuts, deep grooves, made while no one was on site. The foreman mentioned something else. His crew heard sounds during construction, coming from the foundation, rhythmic tapping. They thought it was equipment from a neighboring site. But there were no other sites nearby. The location was remote, 10 miles from the nearest town. Nothing around but forest. Yet every day at 3:47 p.m. the tapping started, lasted exactly 17 minutes, then stopped. The Montana house sat on coordinates that would experience a convergence in 8 months. Someone, or something, was preparing the location in advance, making sure the structure would be ready when the window opened. Day 8. 24 hours before Sarah Chen walked out of the hospital and vanished. Dr. Webb conducted one final evaluation. Sarah requested the meeting, said she wanted to explain everything before she left. Webb didn't know she was planning to leave, but looking back at the recording, her intent was clear. This wasn't a conversation, it was a testimony. Sarah started at the beginning. 6 months before her disappearance, she began experiencing intrusive thoughts. Not voice hearing, not hallucinations, just knowledge appearing fully formed in her mind. Equations she hadn't studied, calculations she had no framework to understand. But she wrote them down, couldn't stop herself. Filled notebooks with symbols and numbers that made no sense. Then the dreams started, always the same. She was in an attic, wooden beams above her, tally marks covering every surface, and she was counting, marking time, waiting for a specific moment. In the dreams, she knew the moment was important, critical. Miss it, and everything would fail. But she didn't know what would fail, didn't know what she was waiting for. The dreams intensified, started including coordinates, numbers she recognized as GPS locations. She'd wake up with the coordinates burned into her memory. Couldn't forget them, even if she tried. So she started visiting the locations. Found 1847 Ashwood Lane. Stood outside the house for hours. Felt pulled toward it, like the structure was calling her. She researched the property, found the history of sudden departures, found Margaret Hollis's name in tenant records, tracked her down, called her. Hollis wouldn't talk at first, but when Sarah mentioned the counting, Hollis broke down, said she'd been waiting 39 years for someone to call, someone who understood. Hollis told Sarah everything, the pregnancy, the sounds in the walls, the tally marks appearing in an empty attic. Sarah asked Hollis one question. Did you feel chosen? Hollis said yes, absolutely yes. From the moment she saw the house, She knew it was meant for her, knew something wanted her there. Sarah felt the same way. She started planning, calculated convergence dates using the equations appearing in her mind. Figured out she needed to be in that attic when the window opened. Needed to give birth during those 3 hours and 17 minutes. But she wasn't pregnant. Wasn't in a relationship. Had no intention of becoming pregnant. Until the night of the convergence, 9 months before giving birth. She woke at 3:47 a.m. Her apartment filled with pressure, air so thick she couldn't breathe. And then the presence, not visible, not audible, but absolutely there, surrounding her, entering her. She described it as violation without force, intimacy without consent. When it ended, she knew what had happened, knew what was growing inside her. Dr. Webb asked why she didn't terminate the pregnancy. Sarah's answer was simple. She tried, made an appointment, went to the clinic. But when the doctor started the procedure, Sarah heard the counting. Coming from inside her own body, the fetus counting its own existence. She couldn't go through with it. Not because she wanted the child, but because she understood. The child wasn't just hers. The child was a bridge, a connection between whatever was counting and the physical world. Sarah moved into the attic at 1847 Ashwood Lane when she was 6 months pregnant, brought supplies, set up her space, started marking the beams, counting down to the birth convergence. Every night at 3:47 a.m., she heard them in the walls, multiple sources, multiple counters, all tracking the same timeline, all waiting for the same moment. The fabric she used to wrap the baby appeared on day 250. She went to sleep, and when she woke, it was there, folded neatly beside her. She didn't question it. By that point, she'd accepted that normal causality didn't apply anymore. She was living in their timeline now, their frequency. Things appeared when needed. Things moved according to rules she couldn't perceive, but had learned to trust. Labor started at 12:30 a.m. on March 17th. The convergence began at 3:47 a.m. Sarah gave birth at 4:03 a.m., 16 minutes into the window, no pain. The baby emerged in complete silence, didn't cry, didn't make any sound, just opened her eyes and looked at Sarah with complete awareness, like she'd been conscious for months, just waiting to arrive. Sarah cut the cord herself, used a piece of the fabric. The fabric cut through tissue like a surgical blade. She tied it off, wrapped the baby, and spent the next 3 hours sitting in absolute silence while the convergence protected them. At 7:04 a.m., the window closed. Sarah heard the counting resume in the walls, louder now, faster, like whatever had been waiting was satisfied. Dr. Webb asked what happened after the convergence ended. Sarah said she waited, knew someone would come. The neighbor would hear the baby eventually. The hospital would ask questions. The police would investigate. All part of the pattern, all necessary steps. Because the baby needed to be documented, needed to have a medical record, birth certificate, proof of existence in the normal world. That was Sarah's job. Bridge the gap between their frequency and ours. Give them legal access to this reality. Webb asked who they were. Sarah said she didn't know, not exactly, but she knew they existed in low frequencies, below human perception. They'd always been there, counting, watching, waiting for conditions that would let them interact with physical matter. The convergences created those conditions, and children born during convergences became permanent bridges, anchors that kept the connection open even after the convergence ended. Sarah's baby was the 8th known bridge in the United States. Rebecca Brennan was the first. Each bridge strengthened the network, made future convergences easier, stronger, more frequent. The pattern was accelerating toward a point where convergences would overlap, where the counting would become constant, where the barrier between their frequency and ours would collapse completely. Webb asked what would happen then. Sarah looked directly at the camera. First time in the entire interview she'd made eye contact with anything except the wall. She said, "They'll stop counting, because they won't need to count anymore. They'll be here, permanently, and every attic, every basement, every enclosed space will become their access point. Nowhere will be quiet. Nowhere will be safe from the counting." Day 9, 3:47 p.m. Sarah Chen walked out of St. Catherine's Hospital, carrying baby Chen. Security footage captured the entire sequence. She moved slowly. No attempt to hide. No looking around to see if anyone was watching. Just steady forward movement through the lobby, past the information desk, through the automatic doors into the parking lot. 47 people were in the lobby during those 40 seconds. Visitors, staff, patients. Detective Rodriguez interviewed 32 of them. Not one remembered seeing a woman with a baby. They remembered being in the lobby, remembered their conversations, their activities. But that 40-second window had vanished from their awareness, like someone had edited those moments out of their perception. The hospital reviewed protocols. Sarah had no discharge paperwork, no release authorization. She was still under observation. The baby was still a patient. Yet no alarms triggered when they left. No staff member attempted to stop them. The system designed specifically to prevent unauthorized departures failed completely. Rodriguez obtained the parking lot footage. Sarah walked to a blue sedan, got in the passenger side. Someone was driving. The angle didn't capture the driver's face, just their hands on the steering wheel. The car pulled away at 3:48 p.m. License plate clearly visible. Rodriguez ran the plate, registered to Margaret Hollis, the woman who'd lived in the attic 39 years earlier. Rodriguez called Hollis in Portland, asked if she'd been in the city on day 9. Hollis said no. She hadn't left Portland in 2 years, hadn't been back to the city where 1847 Ashwood Lane stood since 1985. Rodriguez asked about her car. Hollis said she sold that blue sedan in 1987, had no idea who owned it now. DMV records confirmed the sale. The sedan was sold to a dealership, then resold to private owners, changed hands 6 times. Current registration showed the owner as Jennifer Park, Sarah Chen's former roommate. Rodriguez drove to Park's address, found the sedan parked in the driveway. Park was home, shocked to see police, said her car had been stolen the previous day. She'd filed a report that morning, hadn't gotten around to calling insurance yet. Park's report checked out. But the timing troubled Rodriguez. The car was taken the day before Sarah left the hospital, like someone had prepared transportation in advance, knew exactly when they'd need it. The car was found 3 days later, abandoned in a grocery store parking lot 40 miles away. Clean, no fingerprints, no evidence, just an empty car seat in the back. Sarah Chen and her baby vanished completely. No credit card usage, no phone activity, no sightings that could be verified. Rodriguez issued alerts to every hospital, clinic, and social service agency in 5 states. Someone caring for an infant needed supplies, diapers, formula, medical care. Nothing came back. Until day 23, a woman called Portland police, said she'd seen someone matching Sarah's description. The woman was in a park, sitting on a bench, holding an infant. The caller approached to see if she needed help, got within 10 feet and stopped. Couldn't make herself walk closer. Felt like invisible hands pushing her back. She called police from across the park. Officers arrived 8 minutes later. The bench was empty, but scratched into the wood were fresh marks. Tally marks. 23 of them. One for each day since Sarah left the hospital. The sightings continued. Always the same pattern. Someone spots Sarah and the baby, tries to approach, feels compelled to stop. By the time police arrive, they're gone. But evidence remains. Tally marks, symbols, and in one case, in a library bathroom in Nevada, fabric, the same impossible cotton, left draped over a changing table like a message. The forensics team collected it, sent it to the lab. While they were processing it, tally marks appeared on the evidence bag. Fresh cuts through the plastic. Made while the bag sat in a locked evidence room. Made while cameras recorded the entire space. The footage showed nothing, just the marks appearing, one by one, counting forward this time. Not counting down, counting the days until the next convergence, until the network expanded, until the gaps closed forever.